So since we now think about Hakomi as assisted self-discovery, mindfulness-based assisted self-discovery, we can talk about how, in particular, we will help somebody discover something that's useful, discover something about the way they're organizing experience that when it's brought into consciousness allows for options, allows for alternative ways of being. And we do that with what we call little experiments done in mindfulness. Doesn't need to be a lot of mindfulness, but it's bringing attention to something that gets the client curious, that I'm curious about as the practitioner, but that I can also get the client curious about. Do you notice that your head is turned that way when you're listening to me? Do you notice that every third word, one shoulder goes up? Are you aware that you just said because 10 times in that last sentence? There's a way that you're organizing your expression that gives a clue about some idea you have or some past experience you've had that you're predicting to have again. And let's see if we can find out about that. So this is not a method where I, as a practitioner, analyzes, tracks the behavior of somebody and then analyzes and interprets it. This is a method where I'm going to collaborate with somebody to explore something. Maybe it comes to my attention first, but I'm going to bring it to their attention and using a little experiment. It might be as simple as doing the behavior slowly in mindfulness. That can be the first experiment. What if you just lift that shoulder a few times and just notice what else goes on as you're lifting? Is there a thought? Is there another part of your body? Is there a feeling or a memory? Let's just see what happens if you do that experimentally, with an experimental attitude, with a curiosity about, I wonder, what happens? What am I going to learn about this if I do it on purpose, slowly, in mindfulness? And the experiment could be to do something else. What if I stop you from lifting your shoulder? What if I lift the shoulder for you? What if you turn your head this way instead of that way? What if you experiment? I'm careful with the experiments where I invite the person to do something opposite, especially, or different from what they're doing, because I don't want to suggest a correction. It's not about a correction. It's not about there's something better than the way you're doing it. We're going to experiment to learn something about the habit, to learn something about how it serves you or seems to serve you, as well as learn something about how it limits you or hurts you. And also to experiment to see if what else is possible. If I break up this pattern, this automatic way of being in reaction or organizing around a certain situation, if I break up that pattern, it opens up the door and the windows to all kinds of new possibilities. So we'll do these little experiments in mindfulness, not just to find out something about why the behavior is happening, but also to find out what else is possible. So in Hakomi, there's no end to the kind of experiments we can do. They're usually very simple experiments. Can be as simple as doing the behavior slowly in mindfulness. Some experiments that we do are a way of offering verbally or non-verbally nourishing possibility. We might, for example, say something that's actually a positive statement to the person if we guess that they have a belief that won't allow that to be true. And we're not saying the statement. It could be as simple as, you're a good person, to convince the person that they're a good person. We're doing it so that they can discover what gets in the way of that, what else is happening. The same is true if we offer some kind of touch, for example, as an experiment. And we would do that very carefully and with the person's cooperation and usually with someone else in the room, so there's lots of safety around touch. But we do it slowly in mindfulness with the person's agreement, not so that they're going to be comforted by the touch. We might do that at some point later, but so that they can discover how are they organized around receiving that kind of comfort or that kind of nourishment in touch. And sometimes the reaction will happen even with the very idea of it. The person can even imagine or predict, the feeling if I'm slowly moving a hand toward them to see how they respond to a comforting touch. They might have a reaction before it even happens, because the brain is a predictor. The brain is remembering what's happened before and predicting usually the worst case scenario again. So we're studying the reactions to some offering of something nourishing so that the person can become conscious that there's something in the way of allowing that kind of experience. Another kind of experiment that we might do would be to have someone else, and if I'm doing it one-to-one, I can do it myself, but I like having assistants in the room, and Hakomi works wonderfully as a group therapy method. More about that later. But we would have somebody take over doing something or thinking something that the person is actually doing themselves. So it doesn't sound nourishing, but it's very clear to the person if they have a part of their brain that's arguing with the offering of nourishment, for example. If the nourishing statement is, you're perfectly safe here, but there's a part of their brain saying, no, it's not, watch out, then we might have somebody take over that voice. And it doesn't sound very nourishing, but the person is very clear that this is their own mind, and in the assistant's voice is taking that over so that they can study it, so that they're listening to that message that they usually give themselves unconsciously and bringing it more fully into consciousness. And the same can be done in a nonverbal way with a behavior that's a gesture, perhaps, or lifting the shoulder, as I mentioned, or tightness. If we have a tension pattern that's part of a reaction, and there always is, by the way, one of the assistants could actually take over the tension pattern so that the person can actually study what else goes on. What is that tension pattern doing for them or saying to them? And so there are lots of experiments that involve having somebody take over a behavior that the person is already doing or a message they're already giving themselves in order for them to study it. There's no end to the variety of possible experiments in mindfulness that we can come up with. And it's all about helping the person make discoveries about what they're doing, about how it limits them, about how it has served them, and about how it gets in the way of some kind of missing experience of nourishment that becomes possible when choice opens up. Many of the experiments that we use in a Hakomi session involve offering verbal or nonverbal nourishment, and we do it in a different vein than is done in other methods. I mean, you can imagine that almost every therapy method involves the offering of some kind of comfort or nourishment. In Hakomi, we do that for a different reason. When we use an experimental attitude and we're in the model of self-discovery, we're not trying to fix anything or help somebody in the usual way. We're helping them become more conscious of themselves so that they have more choices. So when we're offering nourishment, let's say as a statement, a comforting or nourishing statement, we like getting a reaction. We're offering the statement that we think they won't believe. The best discoveries that somebody makes are around the ways they don't allow something nourishing to feel true or possible for them. So I would use as an experiment a statement like, "You're perfectly safe here," because I believe it to be true, but I believe that the person won't believe it to be true. And so I'm not trying to convince them that they're safe here. I want them to see that in spite of all evidence, some part of their brain is convinced it's not. And I want them to discover that, and so we can explore it. Sometimes Ron Kurtz used to tell a whole group that he was going to give them a nourishing statement, and he would tell them what the statement was. He said one time he was in Germany, and he actually used this statement, "You're a good person." And he told the audience, "I'm going to tell you you're a good person. I want you to predict what's going to happen for you when you hear that, and write it down or tell your neighbor, and then we'll do it again, and we'll do it in mindfulness." And so he did that, and people thought, "Yeah, that feels good, and it's wonderful to hear I'm a good person and everything." And then he had them in mindful awareness listen while he told them the exact same statement, "You're a good person." And they were shocked to discover almost nobody predicted the reaction they would have. What their unconscious, their adaptive unconscious did with hearing that statement was go back into the past couple of generations of history, and almost all of them had an emotional reaction that they had not predicted. So it's interesting sometimes to do that experimentally with a client. Tell them the nourishing statement, then assist them into mindful awareness, and then say the statement again. And that's where, in mindfulness, the unconscious is going to reveal what's really going on around that idea. So in Hakomi, if I make a guess that somebody has a belief that is preventing them from some kind of nourishing experience, as an experiment, I might offer that nourishing experience, or the idea of it even in a verbal statement, to get a reaction, to help them see their reaction, to help them realize that they're organized around not believing that or not letting that in. So if I say a statement like, "You're safe here," and there's a reaction, then what? Then what do? The person sees they have a reaction, they realize, and they probably realize and know the truth of it. Yeah, I know I go through life as if it's not safe. Then what? Then what do you do? And so then we keep an experimental attitude, and we might just have the person continue to study the reaction and report it to us. I might notice and name what I notice as part of their embodied reaction. Your shoulders tighten up. I see your head pulls down. And so we want to actually see as many parts of the reaction as clearly as possible. And every time we study one part, something else may show up, or a memory might show up that sheds some light. We're not concerned whether the memory is an accurate report of what happened in their life, but we know the memory has information about how they shape experience in their mind, how they think about things, what they believe. So the memories that show up are very useful in terms of showing us the person's beliefs and models, and some understanding of how and why they're organized the way they are. So we want to slow things down and study the reaction, and we might have part of their reaction is a verbal idea in their mind. You know, they might hear an internal voice that says, "I don't believe that," or "watch out" might be one of them. And one of the ways that we can help them pay more attention to that and maybe learn about it, as we said, is to have somebody take over that voice. If I'm working one-to-one with somebody, I'm very careful with that and very clear about it. I might actually say, "Okay, what I'm going to do now is tell you that statement again, the positive statement, and then I'm going to also repeat that voice in your head that says, 'Watch out,' and listen to both and see what else you can learn about it." So when there's a reaction, Yeah, we don't just stop there. Of course, we study the reaction for all of the information it can give us about how this habit, this way of being, this way of organizing experience manifests and expresses itself, and the whole pattern of how that reaction is embodied, and the verb-mind-body connection to things. And then in that exploration, which can take some time, new possibilities begin to be revealed. Something else shows up as a bit of an opening, something else that could be possible, another way of responding to life. One of the fundamental ingredients of being in a Hakomi session, being a Hakomi practitioner, is what we call experimental attitude, staying curious. So all the way through, when we're doing experiments, when we're following the results of the experiments, right through the whole process, we keep this attitude of loving presence and this open, spacious, curious mind. So we keep noticing what shows up moment to moment. We're not going for a particular result when we do an experiment. We're open and curious to what shows up that might surprise both the practitioner and the client. And we want to catch even the most subtle little hints of a reaction to whatever experiment we do and follow that, and that will lead us possibly to another experiment. Certainly it might lead us to insight. It might lead us to discover what wants to happen next. And ultimately it's taking us to what we call the missing experience. What is the missing experience? So we're going to watch the results of whatever happens, and we're going to realize that everything that we do, everything that happens, whether we set it up as an experiment or not, is an experiment. We keep this experimental attitude and curiosity throughout the whole session.